Hey there! I am in need of a few really quick desserts that I can make for my kids real fast. I like to save a lot of time. So I want to show you this really old recipe from a dear friend, Pat, and how I use it to make one mess, and it makes 12 dozen cookies that I freeze in little cookie bites, and it makes a really easy way to make cookies one mess, and then you just pull them out of the freezer to bake them when you want. So first of all, I will show you the recipe of what you'll need. You're going to need 2 cups of shortening, 1.5 cups sugar, 1.5 cups brown sugar, 3 eggs, 1 tablespoon vanilla. You're going to need 4.5 cups flour, 1.5 teaspoons baking soda, 1.5 teaspoons salt, and you're going to need 2 cups of chocolate chips. Okay, here we go. Now, I like to have one of my bowls. I'm going to use a mixer for this. I'm going to use my stand mixer to do all this work, but you can use a hand mixer if you have the kind that has beaters, but I'm going to use my KitchenAid mixer because it's making a giant batch of cookies, and I like to just have it do that. But before I do that, I like to measure the dry ingredients in a separate bowl so that I can mix them well before I throw them into my wet ingredients. So I kind of like to have this part already measured and done. So in your dry bowl, you're going to put in 4.5 cups of flour. Okay, 4.5 cups of flour in our dry bowl. You're also going to add 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda, which is the same as a 1/2 tablespoon. So I'm using a 1/2 tablespoon because I just one thing. So that's 1.5 teaspoons baking soda. And then the same with the salt, 1.5 teaspoons salt. So that's a 1/2 tablespoon of salt. Okay, now before I do anything, I just like to mix that up and get it all blended so there's not a big chunk of baking soda that drops into my dough. So that's all I do. And we'll save this for later when we're adding it to our wet dough in a few. Okay, now we're gonna do the rest of the recipe. In your wet bowl, you're going to add 2 cups of shortening. Shortening takes a little bit of time, so what I've done is I've already measured almost all of my shortening, so I'm just going to show you the last 1/2 cup. So I use a different cup so I can keep my dry cup for all my other ingredients like sugars, and I'm using a different cup. So I like to take a small spatula and scoop it out into my measuring cup, pressing it down my little spatula, and then I take that and I scrape it into where I'm going. So this is a 1/2 cup measure, so I've done 2 full cups and I've got them in this little bowl here. I'm just going to dump it all in my bowl. Now this is not a healthy recipe. Some people like to substitute coconut oil, solid coconut oil, for the shortening. It does taste delicious, but it's not as moist or as chewy or as soft, but you can try that. Maybe you'll want to do 1/2 and 1/2. My kids and I prefer the shortening. We don't eat these very often, so yeah, it's not a healthy recipe. Shortening is not that great for you, but it makes good cookies and pie crust. Okay, so we've got our shortening in here, and the next thing we're going to do is 1.5 cups of brown sugar and 1.5 cups of white sugar. And the brown sugar, you want it to be packed brown sugar. So I'm sticking my cup in there and then I'm pressing in, turning my bag, pressing it in until I get a nice firm 1 cup of sugar. Okay, and then I'm going to do a 1/2 cup. This might be exactly what I needed. This makes 12 dozen cookies, so you will have cookies for a while. Okay, so that's basically a little more than half, but that's okay. 1.5 cups brown sugar. And then we'll do the white sugar. Okay, we've got in there shortening and sugar. Now I told you this was the wet ingredients, right? Well, we need our eggs in there. So we have 3 eggs, and I always break my eggs into a separate bowl first because I've learned that from cooking shows, and just in case you get a shell, it's super easy to take them out. So I just crack my 3 eggs in a separate bowl, and I don't worry about it. If I get a shell, I don't worry about it. I just take it out at the end before mixing. So I look it over, I see no shells, I dump them in. If you see a shell, just use like a metal spoon and gently take them out, and it'll be sticking to your metal spoon really easy. Okay, so we've got eggs, sugar, shortening, 3 teaspoons of vanilla. 3 teaspoons is the same as a tablespoon. So I have my handy tablespoon here. And I use real vanilla because I like real vanilla the best. All right, so that's what my wet ingredients look like. We're gonna go on over to the mixer. The first thing we need to do is cream our ingredients together, our wet ingredients together. So I do it on a low speed at first. And then I move it up slowly to high. That's on the highest speed. Looking pretty good. And I have my favorite spatula here that I like to use to scrape the sides down. It's big, I don't want to use that little one because my hand will get all dirty. So I'm scraping the sides down, scraping my paddle just real quick, just in case any of that shortening is still in there. And I do see a couple little clumps of shortening. Let me see if I can show you how I'm doing that. And there's some dark brown sugar. I see little chunks of it, so I'm just kind of trying to wipe the paddle a little bit. And then I'll just go ahead and whip it up a little bit longer. All right. And these are cool splatter shields that are really helpful for the dry ingredient part especially. Okay, that looks good to me. Okay, that looks good to me. I'm happy with that. So I'm gonna put on this splatter shield thingamajigger. And there's another piece that goes up here, but I'm just gonna do it this way. And then I'm gonna put a small amount of the flour dry mix in at a time. Okay, so I'm gonna let you see how I do that. I'm gonna put this on a much lower speed because I don't want flour flying out everywhere. I know that would be entertaining in my YouTube video, but we're not going for comedy today. Okay, I already mixed those dry ingredients well, so I'm just gonna drop in a little scoop at a time. And it's blending it pretty well. I'll show you in a second what it looks like. Ooh, see how I picked it up and it went flying. sides again real quick. Now, if your batter doesn't look moist and it seems kind of dry and crumbly, you might have had small eggs. That's happened before to me with 3 eggs and it seems not really moist and wet. You want your dough to be a little bit wet. You don't want it to be really crumbly. So I'm going to show you what it looks like. You want to be able to pick it up and you want it to be a little bit gooey. Don't want it to be crumbly. If it's too crumbly, whisk up one more egg and then throw it in there and run your mixer a little bit more. So before you add any chocolate chips, you want to make sure your dough is all incorporated. All the different parts are blended well. Okay, so I'm going to show you what that looks like. I think it looks fine. It doesn't look too crumbly. I can pinch it and make a cookie dough bite pretty easy. See? So it's not like super crumbly. There's no chunks of flour left in there. I think we're ready for the chocolate chips. Okay, let's see if I can get those out. The one thing I didn't get out. Phew, that's the one thing I didn't get out. I was afraid somebody ate them all. So we buy a large bag of semi-sweet chocolate chips so we can just measure out 2 cups. But if you're using like a package of chocolate chips, like a regular package, I'm not sure how much you would need, but I use 2 cups. You can use 1.5 cups. It just won't be as chocolatey, but I like to use 2 cups of chocolate chips. If the packages are like 1.5 cups of chocolate chips, just use a package of chocolate chips. It should be fine, but we like 2. Okay, here we go. Now, we don't want to do this too fast because there's big old chunky chocolate chips in there. So I'm going to do it on slow. And just until the chocolate chips are mixed in. And you can see how the dough's kind of getting solid and getting a nice snap. So we know it's all blended well. So we're good to go. Okay, so now's the fun part. One of the best tools for this is a cookie scoop. I also use it for meatloaf, and I also use it for, not meatloaf, meatballs. But the cookie scoop is a really great tool because it portions your dough into exactly the same size, and it's easy to freeze that way. I forgot to get this part right. Sorry, guys. Okay, so this is the way that I like to do my freezer cookie dough bites. I flash freeze them on a cookie sheet with parchment paper, and then after they're all frozen, I throw them in zip bags because once they're hardened, they'll stay in form and keep their shape. So the cookie scoop that I like is a small scoop because I'm very frugal and I like to make a lot of cookies, a lot of little cookies. I don't like ginormous cookies. So if you do ginormous cookies, you might have a larger scoop. I do not know how big this scoop is. It doesn't have a number on it, but it's about the size of a meatball, if that helps. I've had it for many years, but you just scoop and then you squeeze and it presses out. So let's see if I got you on camera here that you can see all the different parts at one time. Okay, so I dig into my bowl. I press it hard against the side, so I've got a nice compact ball. And then I unscoop it. And I just put as many cookies as I can fit on this tray. They don't need to be spaced because we're just gonna go right into the freezer. Okay? So usually what I do is I bake a batch or 2, and while my cookies are baking, I go ahead and make the rest of the dough into freezer balls, like I'm showing you now. That's what I usually do, but I didn't really prepare my baking sheets for that. And my oven isn't on yet because it is like 101 degrees out. So right now, I think I'm just gonna make some cookie dough bites and just show you that process. This, like I said, makes 12 dozen. So if you have a big party to go to, or if you want to save your time and money, you can make these up ahead of time and then always have frozen bites that you can just put on a cookie sheet, thaw a little bit at room temperature, and then bake 8 to 10 minutes at 375. If you're just doing it right out of the batch that we just made, you would just bake it 375, 8 or 9 minutes. If they're directly frozen out of the freezer, you're going to want to bake them a little longer than 10 minutes. But you can play with that. We like our chocolate chip cookies to be a little chewy, so we don't bake them so they look brown. We bake them so they look semi-done, and then we let them cool lightly on the cookie sheet for a few minutes and then remove them to a baking tray. We store them in an airtight container to help them stay chewy the longest that they will. They don't really last that long. They get eaten quite rapidly. So I generally make like a 1 dozen per cookie sheet. I usually do that, bake them up, and then we eat them all that night. That's generally what happens in my family of 4. Then I always can pull out these frozen cookie dough bites and make fresh cookies at any time. So in the description, I will type the recipe. I will try my best to type the recipe. You can also do a lot of other things with this dough. I'll really quickly tell you what another idea you can do. You can take the dough and make a cookie dough bar by pressing it in to a baking dish. And then you'd have a cookie dough bar that you would bake. And it's much longer than 10 minutes, probably 45 minutes, but you'll have to keep track of that and poke it with a toothpick and kind of watch it. Maybe you can find a recipe on how long cookie dough bars cook online. But I would do 375 and then probably 40 minutes, but you would have to keep track of it. But that's another way to make a big bar without having to use a cookie scoop or spoons to make your little bites. And then the cookie dough bars can have to totally cool, and then you can cut them into bite sizes or bar size, whatever size you're needing. But this recipe is a fairly frugal recipe because it makes so many cookies, and it only uses 2 cups of chocolate chips to make 12 dozen cookies. So this is one of my most frugal recipes that I have, especially to make so much. So the mass amount. Okay, so as you can see, I haven't even gotten halfway through my dough while I'm chit-chatting with you. And I'll show you how many. This is just a pizza pan because it's really big and flat and it's circular. I can stick it in my freezer really well. Let's show you how much dough is left. So I've got all of those cookie dough bites almost ready for the freezer. I'm just gonna fill this up and then stick it in my freezer for like an hour. Once it's frozen, I'll throw them in a gallon zip bag that I date. And I just put chocolate chip cookie bites in the date. And then we can pull out 12 and bake a cookie sheet worth whenever we want. And here's, see all the dough that's left? So I'm gonna be busy working on this. I hope that is a fun recipe for you to try, and I hope you have a great day. And in the description, I will put the recipe. Again, here is a picture. If you want to pause the video, you can kind of see the ingredients you'll need, and you'll be able to see the steps. I will type the description directions. Have a great day. Bye.